Good evening, everyone. Good evening to everyone in the virtual world and to everyone here in the physical world. It's very nice to be here and to be speaking for you today. It's interesting because I wanted to speak my talk today. I wanted to speak about forms, about Zen forms, and what they have meant to me in my life, and how the relationship I have to them has changed, has evolved through the years. And I thought it was I wanted to give this talk because I feel that in the past year we've had a lot of new people coming through the door. And I remember when I was first coming through the door, these forms can seem mysterious. And I don't want to take away the mystery, actually, because they still are mysterious to me. But they also make sense, and I feel have helped me quite a lot. So when I first started coming around, when I first set foot into the Zendo, I was in a place in my life where I was extremely lost. I didn't know what the problem was, but I just felt that there was something that needed to be fixed. I needed fixing. I might actually even say that I had no idea who I was. I was very confused, and I'd been going about my life in a very dissociative state, feeling numb to the world. I was really scared of life and was constantly worried without even realizing it. I could feel the dis-ease in my body, and I was finally ready to do something about it. And so when I started practice, when I started coming to the Zendo, I was very determined. I really trusted Zen. There was, for some reason, for me, Zen felt right. And I felt that if I really threw myself into the practice, that it would work. Whatever was needing my attention to be fixed, I had the feeling that it was going to work with Zen. I felt very safe. The Zendo provided a safe place to look at the awkward and uncomfortable feelings, fears, all the things that would arise on a regular basis in my life. And there was something about coming here that just felt right. Like this could be a place that could provide me a path to healing. So at a certain point, I made a commitment, and I began to come regularly to the Zendo and practice on a weekly basis, and even sometimes more. When I was first coming to the Zendo, I was coming 3-4 times a week. I felt that there was something felt very important to me about practicing with community, not just practicing alone. There was something about being in the room with others that was very powerful to me and cut through. And so one of the things that I immediately began to notice were all the sounds and forms that were around. And for those of us here tonight, we experienced some of those bells. I was thinking we might also experience some clacks. But the form, I feel like the Zen form is living in a sense, and it was living tonight as it surprised me because there was some forms that we would usually have at the beginning of a Dharma talk that we didn't have tonight. So part of what we learn in Zen forms is being able to be flexible and being able to go with the flow and to go with what we have available. As a matter of fact, I think that many of the Zen forms of certain centers are made based on the actual geography of the place, like this shape of the room, the size of the room. All these things come come into play. And so, when it first started coming around, there was all these things. It was like whenever you weren't sitting in silent meditation, there was something going on. There was some kind of movement, there was some kind of sound, there was things, people going this way, robes flying, sounds happening. And even sometimes during meditation, we don't really experience that much here in the city. And too much anymore, because we used to use the kiyosaku, that stick. So at first, be sitting, and then all of a sudden, in a silent period, you'd notice somebody walking around behind you, and all of a sudden you'd hear, whack! Like, what is going on? And like I said, it all seemed very mysterious. It seemed like there were some secrets that I wasn't privy to yet. But after some time, after being in the form for some time, I started to realize that the forms were there to kind of help you. The forms were there to let you know where you were, maybe where you're supposed to be, what was going to come next. It kind of just let you know, it kind of like held you in a way. There was actually an order to it all. And this I found very comforting. Because the state of mind that I was in when I first was coming to the Zendo, I really needed form. I needed something to keep my mind in line. I needed these boundaries. I needed the boundaries that the forms provided to keep my mind from running wild. It's like I came into the practice wanting to find freedom in my life, freedom on the inside. I wanted to be free, to be unchained. But that wasn't possible. I was a slave to my own mind and habits, and I would never find any kind of way if I was free. I needed these gates to hold me and to allow my mind to be still. If I was free, would I sit? If I was free, would I really still myself to the point where I can look inside, see what was going on? I don't think so. So freedom wasn't the answer. I needed form. And I found the sounds and movements of Zen to help me stay in my body more and in my mind, daydreaming less. I remember the very first sesshin or Zen retreat that I did was at this other center in upstate New York. And on the first day, we had a little orientation, and the monk that was giving us our orientation said that as he was giving us some basic zazen orientation, and in that instruction, he told us that it was impossible to stop the mind. It was impossible to still the mind. But it was possible to almost still our bodies, to make our bodies as still as possible. And the more still our bodies were, the greater possibility we had to slow down our minds and to still our minds. And as we settle and still ourselves, we can start to see what's happening on the inside. We can see the complex knot that is tangled up inside and begin the very long process of untangling those knots. And the form also helped me in organizing time when there was no form, in a sense, the meditation periods. I remember when I first started coming to sit, the meditation period scared me. I was scared of sitting and not moving for half an hour. I was scared of my feet falling asleep. And, I think also scared on the things that I was going to face beyond the physical stuff. So knowing that there was a bell there that was going to save me, that was going to, that was going to, I wasn't going to have to sit there forever. It helped. It helped give me the strength to keep sitting and to keep going. So I felt for me the first part of the practice was kind of getting used to these forms. And after some time, after practicing for some time, you kind of stop thinking about it. It starts to become second nature. The bell rings, you bow, you stand up. You can even do it with your eyes closed after a while. The sounds always let you know where to be and what to do. And then you can start to really be in the flow of these forms, and you start to kind of see how you're a part of this elaborate dance. It's kind of always happening. And then, like many people, after I had been around for some time and started to get comfortable in the flow of these forms, then I started getting approached and started being asked if I would participate in some of these forms, play some of these instruments, do some of the roles where you see people going up, light incense, things like that. And, in true kind of Zen fashion, it was, it's kind of like every time you feel comfortable somewhere, there's someone to pull that rug out from under you and put you back in a position that's not comfortable. Because there's a lot that we can learn about ourselves from feeling uncomfortable. And I think playing roles in liturgy is an enormous teaching. So many things come up when we start to learn an instrument. And I think the very first position I ever did was Jikido in the Zendo. It was the timekeeper, the person that rings the bells and leads us through walking meditation, through Kinhen. And then on retreats, I started to be asked to do other positions. The Mokugyo, which we didn't hear tonight, which is a kind of like a heartbeat. It's a pulse that kind of tells you what the rhythm of the chanting ought to be. And then there were several different positions where you ring bells. And so many things would come up in liturgy practice. A whole array of complex emotions and bodily sensations would arise every time you make a mistake. Every time I would play a bell in the wrong place or miss a bell, all these things would start coming up. Feelings of shame for making a mistake. Feeling like I let others down or that I would miss a cue. Anger that I was put in this position. I never asked for this. Fear that I would make another mistake. All these things would come up during a Zen Buddhist chanting service. Kind of crazy. And then on the other side of that, once the things start to become habitual and you get used to your positions, then there was another side, a dark side of that, where you get really used to the way things are supposed to go. And then if somebody else missed something, I start finding myself getting impatient and agitated at others. I didn't make a mistake. They missed their cue. It wasn't my fault. Of course, that was internal. But, so then started to notice judgment arising and critical thought arising. I remember a time when I was on retreat at a place where we used to do our summer retreats was in this this kind of retreat house. It was this house upstate New York that we would turn into a monastery. And the room that we would sit in, that was our zendo, was a very small room. And we'd stuff everybody in there. And there was this one summer when I was the cook. I was cooking for the retreat, and where the cook would sit in the zendo at that time was in the back, right next to the one of the monitors. So in the back of the zendo, there's two monitors who were always facing in, kind of keeping an eye on everyone. And so the tenzo would sit right next to the monitor there. And there was this jikido during that time who was constantly missing these bells in the morning. And there was this one elaborate process. When Roshi would come in the morning and make her rounds, at the very end of that, there were these sequence of bells that would lead to her sitting, and then us, doing our first chant. And it was always a little confusing, especially at first if you're a jikido, when those bells would happen. So I was sitting right next to the jikido. So it wasn't I was the cook. I was the cook. I had nothing to do with the jikido. But still, every morning when that happened, I'd lean over and say, bang, hit the bell, bang, hit the bell. And so one day, after we had a break, one of the monitors came up to me and pulled me aside and asked me to please not do that. That they were working with the jikido, and it was their responsibility, and please don't do that. So the next morning, I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the jikido, and the monitors are sitting next to me, and I see Roshi come in, and I see her getting up to the mat, and I don't see the jikido picking up the striker to hit the bell. And she goes and makes the bow, and he doesn't do anything, and the monitor next to me doesn't say anything, and I couldn't help myself. I went, bang! and very softly, the monitor who was sitting next to me put her hand on my knee. And that was the greatest teaching that I ever could have had at that time. It was very humbling. It was like, I don't know why I couldn't just keep my mouth shut. I could have just been thinking about what I was going to cook for breakfast. But, she really taught me a lesson in that moment about what our roles are, and that's a big part, and that's something that we learn a lot in liturgy. It's like if your role is to hit the bell, you just hit the bell. If it's to clack, you clack. If it's to bow, you just bow. It's another way for us to kind of lose ourselves in the form and just fall into this flow. We don't need to worry about someone else doing that part right. We don't need to get into anybody else's business. Unless it is your job, right? It was the job of the monitor to deal with the jikido. It wasn't my job. So I think what's happening here in liturgy, when we're practicing liturgy, is that it's providing us a step in between what's happening on the cushion and what's happening in our lives once we walk out that door. Because we all know when we walk out that door, things change. So, for those of you who have experienced liturgy, I know there's some people on the screen I see who definitely have experienced it, and there's a few of us here also. I think you may remember some of the different emotions and bodily sensations that came up as you were learning your first positions, or maybe even still. What would arise if you missed a bell? What would arise if you made a mistake? And how did you deal with that? Consider for yourself for a moment that if all that stuff came up while you were hitting a bell at a Buddhist chanting service, imagine what happens internally if you are walking across the street and you bump into somebody and they turn and they give you a really nasty look. Imagine all the things that arise in you then. How often do we notice all those things that arise? How do you act? How does it change the way you act? Do you even notice? So I feel that the practice of liturgy and form helps us connect these dots. The practice of liturgy helps us start to practice how we can be in the world. And, that brings me to what I think liturgy is really about. And when we practice the forms more and more, and into the flow of them more and more, for me, the practice comes down to being together mindfully, being in communication and interaction with others, and being mindful with our interaction and with what's happening in us. It's not about getting it right, at least not here, not at the Village Zendo. So, as I continue down this path of my relationship with liturgy, after some years, then I was approached and I was asked if I would be a liturgy master, which is a very lofty sounding title, but it's just kind of like the liturgy director. It's the person that kind of conducts the liturgy group during retreats. Because we have 3 services a day when we're on retreat. So, and so once again, the rug was pulled out from underneath me. I thought that I had a grasp on all these forms, and now I'm asked to direct it. So I just wanted to tell a story about the very first retreat that happened. So, when I was being trained to be liturgy master, I was being trained by someone who's no longer here, who was very, very, very strict and very, very rough, in a sense, and it was almost like I've heard that story. I remember in Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, there's a story about a sword master who goes to a Zen, who wants to study, and he goes to a sword master, and the sword master, after a while, would creep up behind him every now and then, whack him when he wasn't seeing it, at the least. And that's what being trained by this person felt like. And every time a service was over, he'd pull me aside and tell me all the things I did wrong. And in a certain sense, this was great because it really instilled the forms in me in a very strong sense. But so I remember the very first time I was the liturgy master at a retreat after this person had left. And so I kind of felt like I was on my own also. And there was this one beginning service of one of the weeks. We had all new people there. And needless to say, it was a total train wreck, this service. It was just, everybody did everything wrong. Everybody missed their cues, the bells were in the wrong place, the people didn't get to their places on time. And as this service is unraveling, I'm just a wreck inside. I'm just a total wreck. It's like all these things are popping up because I feel like now the spotlight is on me, and all those mistakes are a reflection on me. And I'm just literally crushed. I'm sitting there standing there in this service, just like disintegrating. And the service ends, and I was one of the first people to exit after the service, and I was just so crushed, and I was so embarrassed. And I walked out, and Roshi was sitting in her seat, and I looked up at Roshi, and she looked at me with the biggest smile. And that was it. That was it. My everything that I thought about liturgy and everything that I had been considering about it changed in that moment. And I realized it wasn't about getting it right. That was the moment when I realized It's about being together. That's when I first started to realize it's about being together. So the form is the form. What happens is what happens, and the real question is, what happens? Are you really aware of what happens? Are you awake to what is happening right now? Just two little anecdotes to end with. A really kind of physical and historical example of how important form is, I think, can be illustrated in the Zen monastery Tassajara, which is a part of the San Francisco Zen Center. So Tassajara is a monastery and kind of Zen monastery kind of community that was found in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods in California. Some land was bought, and it was bought with the purpose of being part of the San Francisco Zendo. And when it was first established, there was no form there whatsoever. There was maybe a few buildings, but there was no form. There was no daily practice. There was no, practice periods. There was no times when you would meet for service. It was just just there at first. And what happened? This was in the 60s too, so it basically turned into a hippie commune. People heard about this and they started flocking there. And it just kind of like became this place where people were just kind of just like lounging around and getting high and not really doing anything. And so when the abbot of San Francisco Zen Center at that time saw what was happening, he called on someone from the monastery that he was based on in Japan, at Eiheiji. He called on them to come in. They saw what was happening, and they made form. They made a main zendo. They made a Buddha hall. They made a place to eat, and they made a schedule. At this time in the morning, we'll all come together and we'll sit in this time. And they still use that form to this day. I think it's the same thing like I said in the beginning. Form, I think, is alive, and it's always kind of flowing and moving and changing. So there's some things that always change, but the form is what really has kind of made that place what it is and what keeps it together. And then the last thing I just wanted to speak about is I was reminded again, I think from something Tokuyu Sensei has been putting together a little pamphlet that people can take with them that have kind of the important things about how we view our practice. And one of the things that I think is kind of unique to our Sangha is this. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but I may be wrong about this. It may be other places too, but it's called the 5 expressions. 5 expressions of our Zen practice, and the 5 expressions are to meditate, to study, to communicate, to act, and to care. And when I think about liturgy and Zen forms, I feel like it specifically goes into the area of to communicate and to act. And on our website, there's a kind of a breakdown and definition of all of these. And what I love is that it not only says what the definition is, but it tells you what the distortion of that definition is. So to communicate, for example, it says to express one's true nature through speaking, writing, music, arts, and body. Its distorted form is grasping for approval at the cost of true expression. Think about that for a moment. grasping for approval at the cost of true expression. For me, that is something that I've been incredibly guilty of in my life. And I think is something that would arise during liturgy practice. And then to act says to act and thereby serve the world, community, family, and self. The distorted form of this is mindless activity and judgment and comparison towards self and others. So it's really interesting because I feel that the practice of liturgy in a form really brings us face to face with both sides of those expressions, and with probably both sides of all of these. A lot of times it's the distorted ones that stick to our minds a little bit more because they feel awkward. But it's also important, I think, to realize that when we are bowing and when we're ringing a bell, we are also expressing our true nature. So for those of you that are kind of new to practice, I just kind of encourage you to not really care too much about what the meaning of the form is and what its historical purposes are. So just throw yourself into it. And just when you're bowing, just bow. And when you're ringing the bell, just ring the bell. And when you're chanting, just chant. And let yourself fall into your body. And let all those things in your mind float away. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.